The air in the Restoration Fire Assembly Fellowship Hall didn't just go still, it died. 32 women, the spiritual bedrock of Abuja's elite, were frozen in a tableau of shock. At the center of the storm stood Helena Okoro. She wasn't wearing the usual muted linens of a bishop's wife. She wore crimson, a red so bold it looked like a wound against the white tiled floor. Elder Beatrice Adeyemi stood across from her, breathing like a cornered animal, her smartphone thrust forward like a holy relic. "I have the receipts!" Beatrice's voice cracked the silence. On the screen, a grainy but unmistakable photo showed Helena leaning into a man who was not the bishop. The hall hummed with the feedback of a live mic, a low, persistent drone that mimicked the ringing in Helena's ears. Helena's silver clutch slipped. Crack! The sound of expensive leather hitting the floor felt like a gavel bringing a life sentence. Her chest constricted. She wanted to scream that a photo wasn't the whole truth, but her throat was lined with ash. How had the pillar of Abuja become the scandal of the year? To understand the fire, you have to look at the drought that preceded it. 12 years of "Yes, my lord," and "Amen" had led to this moment of absolute exposure. The crimson dress wasn't just fashion, it was a flare sent up from a drowning woman. As the sisters of the church began to whisper, the sound rising like a swarm of locusts, Helena didn't see them. She saw the ghost of the woman she used to be before the silence of the bishop's house turned her into a mannequin. 3 months earlier, the Okoro household was a masterclass in performative holiness. At 38, Helena was the envy of every woman in Nigeria. Her children were tucked away in prestigious boarding schools, and her husband, Bishop Nathaniel, was a man whose voice could move mountains and bank accounts alike. Every Sunday, she sat in the power row, her headscarf tied with architectural precision. But inside their Maitama mansion, the silence was a physical weight. Nathaniel didn't yell, he simply drifted. He was a man of God who had no time for the woman God gave him. When they ate, the only sound was the scrape of forks against fine china. When she reached for his hand under the duvet, he would gently pat her, a gesture more suited for a grieving parishioner than a wife, before turning to face the wall. "Nate, I bought those mangoes you like," she'd say, desperate for a spark. "God is good, Hella. Put them in the fridge," he'd respond without looking up from his Greek lexicon. He wasn't cheating, he was just gone. He was married to the ministry, and Helena was merely the decorated altar he left his keys on. She began to feel like a shadow in her own hallways, a ghost haunting a beautiful museum. She would stand before the floor-to-ceiling mirrors, tracing the lines on her face, wondering when she had become invisible. Loneliness in a crowded church is a tragedy, but loneliness in a marriage is a slow-acting poison. She was a woman starving at a banquet, waiting for a crumb of intimacy that never fell from the bishop's table. The catalyst arrived via a WhatsApp ping that shattered a particularly gray Tuesday. Lydia Mensah, Helena's university roommate, was coming to Abuja. Lydia was everything Helena had suppressed, loud, ambitious, and unapologetically vibrant. When they met at a hidden cafe in Wuse 2, the contrast was jarring. Helena wore a high-necked navy gown. Lydia wore a silk jumpsuit that looked like a sunset. "Helena, you look like you're preparing for your own funeral," Lydia said, bypassing the politenesses. The bluntness was a bucket of cold water. Over artisanal coffee, the dam finally broke. Helena spoke of the cold bed, the work of the Lord that acted as a barrier, and the terrifying realization that she couldn't remember the last time Nathaniel had looked her in the eyes and actually seen her. "You are 38, not 80, Lydia hissed, leaning across the table. "You are a queen being treated like a footstool. When did the bishop's wife swallow Helena?" Lydia didn't offer scriptures or platitudes. She offered a mirror. She pointed out that Helena's skin was dull not from age, but from neglect. You've been surviving on the fumes of other people's admiration, Hella, but who admires you when the lights go out? That night, Helena went home and looked at her closet, a sea of beige, gray, and black. She felt a sudden, violent urge to burn it all. For the first time in a decade, she felt a flicker of anger. And anger, she realized, felt a lot more like living than sadness ever did. The transformation wasn't instant, but it was deliberate. Lydia took Helena to a high-end studio where the air smelt of lemongrass and expensive chemicals. As the stylist worked on her hair, shedding the heavy maternly wig for soft, bouncy curls, Helena felt a strange tingling in her scalp, as if her nerves were waking up from a long sleep. When the makeup artist applied a soft berry gloss, Helena gasped. The woman in the mirror had a jawline. She had eyes that could hold a secret. She had a mouth that looked like it belonged to someone who laughed. They went shopping afterward, bypassing the First Lady boutiques for something more contemporary. She bought the navy wrap dress, the emerald silk blouse, and finally, tucked away in the back of a boutique, the crimson dress. "It's too much," Helena whispered, touching the fabric. "It's exactly enough," Lydia countered. That evening, Helena waited in the living room. She had spent 2 hours on her appearance. She smelled of vanilla and musk. When Nathaniel walked in, his briefcase heavy with the burdens of the congregation, he walked right past her. "Dinner is in the warmer," he muttered, heading to his study. "Nate?" she called out. He stopped, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. "I have a board meeting at 6 a.m., Hella. Pray for me." The door clicked shut. Helena stood in the middle of the room, her heart hammering against the navy silk. The reawakening had a bitter side effect. She was now awake enough to feel the full sting of his indifference. She wasn't just invisible, she was irrelevant. The alumni dinner at the Hilton rooftop was supposed to be a one-night escape. Helena told herself she just wanted to hear her own name without Mrs. Bishop attached to it. The sapphire dress she chose was elegant but understated. She looked like a woman with a life of her own. The air was cool, the Abuja skyline a carpet of twinkling lights. Amid the clinking of glasses and the smooth jazz, she met Daniel Reed. He wasn't a man of God in the way she was used to. He was a widower, an architect who spoke in terms of foundations and light. When they were introduced, he didn't give her a polite nod. He looked at her, really looked. "You have a very quiet strength, Helena," he said, handing her a glass of sparkling water. "But your eyes look like they've been holding their breath for a long time." The accuracy of the statement made her dizzy. For the next hour, they didn't talk about theology or church growth. They talked about jazz, the loss of parents, and the way the sun sets over the Zuma Rock. Daniel listened with an intensity that made Helena feel like the only person in the room. When he asked for her number, her conscience gave a small, weak tug, but the feeling of being cherished, even for an hour, was like oxygen to a diver. "Just coffee," she told herself as she typed the digits into his phone. "It's just coffee." But deep down, as she drove back to her silent mansion, she knew she was carrying a spark into a room full of dry straw. Coffee led to a lunch in a secluded garden restaurant in Guarimpa. Lunch led to long, winding phone calls while Nathaniel was at all-night vigils. Daniel Reed was a dangerous man, not because he was a villain, but because he was kind. He noticed the small things, the way she bit her lip when she was nervous, her preference for Earl tea over green tea. "You deserve to be celebrated, not just tolerated," Daniel told her one rainy afternoon. He reached across the table and took her hand. His skin was warm. Helena didn't pull away. The touch sent a jolt through her that felt like a sin and a miracle at once. For years, she had been a vessel for the Lord, a partner in the ministry, and a mother to her children. With Daniel, she was just Helena. She began to lie. The women's fellowship meetings she attended were often hours spent in Daniel's car talking about the lives they wished they had. She felt a sickening guilt every Sunday as she sat beside Nathaniel, but it was overshadowed by a desperate hunger. She was emotionally starving, and Daniel was a feast. She began to buy more clothes, the crimson dress being the crowning jewel. She was dressing for a man who noticed the color of her eyes. Nathaniel, meanwhile, noticed nothing. He was busy planning a 5,000-seat expansion for the church. He was building a kingdom of stone, while his own home was turning to sand. Helena realized with a chill that she could probably have brought Daniel into the house, and Nathaniel wouldn't have noticed as long as his shirts were ironed. While Helena was drowning in the sweetness of Daniel's attention, a shark was circling. Elder Beatrice Ariemi was a woman who prided herself on being the eyes of the sanctuary. She had always been slightly jealous of Helena's effortless grace, and she had noticed the change. The new hair, the glowing skin, the way Helena's phone was never left face up on the table anymore. Beatrice began to follow the scent. One evening, after a particularly grueling Bible study, she saw Helena's silver SUV turn toward a part of town the bishop's wife had no business being in. Beatrice followed at a distance. She watched Helena enter a boutique hotel restaurant. Minutes later, Beatrice saw a man join her. He wasn't the bishop. He was younger, taller, and he looked at Helena with a hunger that Beatrice recognized instantly. From her parked car, Beatrice pulled out her phone. The zoom lens was high quality. She caught them in the amber glow of the restaurant lights. She caught the moment Daniel touched Helena's cheek. She caught Helena's radiant, genuine smile, a smile she never wore in the front row of the church. "Caught you," Beatrice whispered, the phone screen illuminating her face with a ghostly light. To Beatrice, this wasn't just a scandal. It was a duty. She felt a perverse sense of righteousness. She wasn't destroying a marriage. She was purging the leaven from the bread. She spent the next 3 days agonizing over the perfect moment to strike. She wanted maximum impact. She wanted the crimson dress to be stained forever. The Wednesday Sisters in Grace meeting was always well attended, but this evening felt different. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and floor wax. Helena arrived late, wearing the crimson dress. She had come straight from a brief, tearful goodbye with Daniel. She had tried to end it, feeling the walls closing in, but the emotions were too raw. She stepped into the hall, and the silence hit her like a physical blow. The scraping of metal chairs sounded like gunshots. "How dare you step into this sanctuary after what you've done?" Beatrice's voice was a jagged blade. The accusation hung in the air, vibrating. Helena felt her knees go weak. The circle of women, her sisters, retreated as if she were a leper. The photos were being passed around now, small screens glowing with the evidence of her shame. Helena looked down at her dress. In this room of white and beige, she looked like a fire out of control. "I saw you," Beatrice screamed, her face contorted with the mixture of rage and triumph. "With my own eyes, while the bishop is out saving souls, you are in the arms of a stranger." Helena's mind screamed for a lie, but her body was tired of pretending. The clutch hit the floor. She looked at the faces. Some were disgusted, some were pitying, but most were hungry for the fall. She realized then that her spotless reputation had been a cage, and as the door of the hall swung open to reveal Bishop Nathaniel Okoro standing there, she realized the cage had just been set on fire. Nathaniel Okoro did not look like a man of power at that moment. He looked like a man who'd just seen his own house collapse in a rearview mirror. He walked through the crowd of women who parted like the Red Sea. He didn't look at Beatrice. He didn't look at the phone screens. He only looked at Helena. "Is it true?" he asked. His voice wasn't the thunderous baritone from the pulpit. It was thin, brittle. The room held its breath. A single no might have saved her. A deflection about mentoring or friendship might have muddied the waters enough for a cover-up. But Helena looked at her husband, truly looked at him, and saw the decades of silence between them. "Yes," she said. The word was a tectonic shift. Someone in the back gasped. Another began to pray in a frantic whisper. "I would like to speak with my wife, privately," Nathaniel said. His composure was terrifying. He took her arm, not roughly, but with a firmness that brooked no argument, and led her out of the hall. As they walked past Beatrice, the elder held the phone up one last time. Nathaniel didn't even glance at it. The drive home was the loudest silence of her life. The city lights of Abuja blurred past the window. Helena watched her reflection in the glass. She was still wearing the crimson dress, but the power it had given her earlier was gone. Now it just felt like a target. She wondered if this was the last time she would ever enter their home as a wife, or if she was already a widow of a different kind. Inside the Maitama mansion, the lights were too bright. Nathaniel sat in his leather armchair, the one where he usually studied his sermons. "Who is he?" "His name is Daniel. He's an architect." "Did you—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "No," Helena said, her voice steadying, "but I wanted to, because he saw me, Nate. He talked to me. He didn't treat me like a piece of church furniture." Nathaniel flinched as if she had slapped him. "I provided everything, this house, the cars, the respect." "You provided a museum," Helena shouted, the pent-up frustration of 12 years erupting. "I was lonely, Nathaniel. I slept next to a man of God every night, but I woke up next to a stranger. I tried to talk to you. I tried to reach you. You were always too busy building your kingdom to care about your home." Nathaniel opened his mouth to defend himself, to cite the scriptures on a wife's submission, but the words died in his throat. He looked around the room. It was perfect. It was cold. He realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd asked Helena how she was feeling, truly feeling, without expecting a "fine, thank God" in return. "I didn't cheat on you physically," she whispered, the fire leaving her. "But I left you in my heart a long time ago. Daniel just filled the space you left empty." The bishop sat in the silence of his perfect house, and for the first time in years, he didn't have a sermon ready. The following Sunday, the Restoration Fire Assembly was packed to the rafters. The air was electric with scandal. Everyone expected a resignation, a divorce, or a blistering sermon on Jezebel. Helena sat in her usual seat, but she wore no headscarf. Her head was bowed. Nathaniel walked to the pulpit. He looked older. He didn't open his Bible. "There has been a great sin in my house," he began. The congregation leaned in. "My wife has fallen." Helena felt the sting of the words. "But," he continued, his voice trembling, "I realized this week that I'm the one who pushed her toward the edge. I was a bishop to thousands, but I was a ghost to my wife. I preached about the covenant of marriage while I was breaking mine through neglect and pride." A wave of shock traveled through the pews. This wasn't the script. "I'm not here to excuse sin. I'm here to confess mine. We're going to step away from leadership for a season, to rebuild the altar that actually matters, our home." Tears were flowing now, not just from Helena, but from women in the pews who recognized their own silent marriages. It wasn't a performance of holiness, it was a demonstration of it. As Helena walked up to the pulpit and took his hand, the crimson dress of Wednesday was a memory. Today, she wore the truth. The months that followed were not a montage of easy smiles. They were grueling. There were days of shouting, days of weeping, and weeks where they stayed in separate rooms because the honesty was too sharp. They went to counseling not with their own elders, but with a couple who didn't care about their titles. Nathaniel had to learn how to be a husband without a microphone. He had to learn how to make tea, how to listen to Helena's fears about aging, and how to apologize without using "the Lord says." Helena had to cut ties with Daniel completely. It was a grief she had to process alone, a shadow of "what if" that she had to bury to save what is. Slowly, the museum began to feel like a home. They started taking walks in the evenings, real walks where phones were left at home. They talked about their children, their own childhoods, and the mistakes they didn't want to repeat. One evening, months later, Nathaniel found her in the bedroom. She was holding the crimson dress, preparing to give it away. "Keep it," he said softly, taking her hand. "It reminds me of the worst mistake of my life," she replied. "It reminds me of the day I almost lost you because I wasn't looking," he said. "It's a reminder that beauty needs to be seen to survive." A year later, the Okoros returned to the ministry, but they were different people. The power couple image was gone, replaced by a raw, accessible vulnerability. Their marriage wasn't perfect, it was real. They launched a marriage ministry that didn't focus on rules, but on connection. One evening, their daughter, home from school, walked onto the balcony to find them sharing a plate of roasted corn, laughing at some private joke. "Ah, romance is back in the building," she teased. Nathaniel pulled Helena closer. "It's not romance, princess. It's work, but it's the best work I've ever done." The story of the bishop's wife in the crimson dress became a legend in Abuja, not as a story of shame, but as a story of radical mercy. It taught a city that silence is the greatest enemy of love, and that exposure, while painful, is often the only way to heal a wound that has been festering in the dark. Helena still wore red occasionally, but she no longer wore it as a flare for help. She wore it because she was alive, she was seen, and for the first time in her life, she was home. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, teach, and entertain. Until next time, bye!